Hey folks, Randy Newberg here from beautiful Missoula, Montana, and you guys are in for the treat of the year, I think, today. This edition of Randy Newberg Unfiltered has two guests that if you could see them right here in front of me, you'd probably laugh because they are characters of the highest degree. They are also two of America's greatest conservationists who, when I tell you who they are, you're going to nod your head and say yes. But so Randy Newberg Unfiltered is here with Bob Munson and Charlie Decker, two of the four co-founders of the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, now celebrating its 31st year in existence. So, Bob, thanks for taking the time to share a conservation dream with me and my listeners.
Well, I'm thrilled to be here. Let me tell you, anytime I could sit down with Randy, I wish you folks could understand what I'm looking at today. I mean, here's a guy that's on our board of directors. He is, without a doubt, the biggest public lands hunting advocate in the country. But if you saw how he was dressed and what he was nicknamed today, I mean, the guy looks like a big, overgrown Boy Scout, and he's got the whitest legs of anybody I've ever seen in my life. But it's a pleasure, nevertheless, Randy.
Well, thank you, Bob. And Charlie is here, and if you've ever met Charlie Decker, he makes an impression on you. And if you haven't met Charlie Decker, put it on your list of things to do. If Letterman had a top 10 things to do in America, I think meeting Charlie Decker would be in the top 3. So, Charlie, thanks for being with us.
Well, thank you, Randy. I'm thrilled to be here. It's been really quite a ride with the Elk Foundation. We thank you for all you've done with the Elk Foundation. And I would say at one time you were my worst nemesis on the Fish and Game Commission of Montana. Randy is, if those of you that just have listened to him, he's the most tenacious, undereducated advocate for wildlife that I've ever known. But he's a pusher and a doer. I'm glad to be here, Randy.
Well, thanks, Charlie. Those of you who don't know one of Charlie's other backgrounds is he served on the Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks Commission for
8 years.
8 years. And I would call Charlie at home. I would see him at commission meetings because I was there advocating on behalf of wildlife and hunters. And there were times I thought Charlie was going to put me in the headlock and just throw me out the front door.
And he could do it.
He could do it, yeah. And the other part the day I met Charlie is my dad, and Charlie identifies himself as, what do you say? You're a Jippo logger?
Yes, sir.
And my dad is a logger. I come from a family of loggers. And the minute I met Charlie, I'm like, I don't know if he and my dad were separated at birth and one of the twins ended up in Montana and one stayed in Minnesota. But anyhow, it's great to be here with two guys such as Bob and Charlie. And those of you who are listening, if you're not a member of the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, I would bet when you're done listening to this podcast, you're going to go online to rmef.org and you're probably going to want to become a member of the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, because the way this podcast is going to unfold is in these two characters. Bob's the straight man and Charlie's the character. So when we want the serious answer, we're going to talk to Bob. That question is going to get addressed to Bob. When we want the question that's just no holds barred, bloody knuckles, just this is how it is, well, that's when you ask Charlie. Bob, have you ever known Charlie to use spare words in getting his point across?
No. It's that simple. I mean, here we are sitting in the headquarters of the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, Missoula, Montana, where we moved in 1988, moved into a factory, and now we're in this beautiful building that is owned, though, by 205,000 members of the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation. And let me tell you, it's their building because the volunteers of this outfit drive the organization. But it was a long time ago in 1984 when we were up in Troy and Libby.
Yeah. So you guys just chime in here because I've heard the story. How I came to the Elk Foundation is I was going to college in Reno in 1986 or 87. And there was a sporting goods store there called Mark IV and Strike. And I don't even know if it's still in existence. But when I went there, there was this magazine laying on the store countertop there. And it said Bugle. And there was this majestic picture of this big bull elk. And I'm this kid of 23 years old who has just moved out west. And growing up in northern Minnesota, I might have dreamed of being an astronaut when I was a kid. I might have dreamed of being, I don't know, a senator or a professional football player. But for a kid growing up in the Midwest at that time, thinking I would ever be an elk hunter was so far out of my realm that I didn't even dare dream it. It was just something that only rich people were going to do or that the nobility were going to do. So when I'm standing in the sporting goods store in Reno and I see this magazine, I'm thumbing through it and I'm like, oh my goodness, you mean there's a chance someday I could become an elk hunter? I opened the front cover and it had some address that I didn't, for me, Troy or Libby, Montana could have just as well been at the South Pole.
That address, by the way, was Wilderness Plateau, Troy, Montana. Now, if that doesn't tell you our roots, I don't know what would.
Oh, gosh. And so, I don't know. I think the annual membership fee at that time was like $12 or $14.
$15.
Was it? Okay.
$15.
So I go to the post. So now remember, I come from a family of loggers. My dad didn't believe in a checkbook. Everything was transacted with a U.S. postal money order. So I go to the post office, get a money order, make it out to this RMEF, and I drop it in the mail, and I'm like, I'll probably never see that again, but what the heck? Maybe I'll get to hunt an elk someday. 3-4 weeks later, I get a copy of that magazine. I'm like, oh my gosh, look at this. And that kind of is how Randy Newberg came to what Bob, Charlie, and your other two co-founders dreamed up somewhere along the way. And along this path, you've recruited thousands and thousands of guys like me who probably never thought that they would become part of the American conservation story by hunting elk. So that's how I got there. Now I want to know from you guys, and whoever wants to chime in and tell the story, how did this happen? How did something go from being just an idea to becoming one of the largest conservation organizations the world has seen?
Well, it's a long story, and we've told it 100 times. But the thing that I would say, and it's obvious if you look at Bob and I, it was meant to happen. It was divine or something. I have no clue, but we were 4 members of a small church. And our pastor had the idea that he had picked up a sheep brochure from the National, or the FNAS, which is the Foundation for North American Sheep. And I'm an avid elk hunter, and he was an avid elk hunter. And he said, nobody's doing anything for elk. What do you think? And Bob and Bill, Bob's brother, they are from Chicago, had not hunted much, but thought it was a great idea. And it was a great idea, but, and I'll let Bob give you the numbers, but we got all excited, and Spokane, Washington was the biggest town near us, and I had an attorney there that we went and talked about getting a 5013C. We knew we should have made it a for-profit organization. We'd both be retired now, but we decided to do a non-profit, and we were hicks from the sticks. We got hosed at every turn in Spokane. That's a story in itself. But
We were four of the most naive sportsmen on the face of the earth, and I got to admit that I couldn't even really call my brother a sportsman. He just 8 years my younger brother. He wanted to do what I did usually, so I jumped on this because I was selling real estate. Well, I wasn't selling real estate in Troy because these were the days of Jimmy Carter and 21% interest rate.
Hard to sell anything.
Yeah, I couldn't sell puppies on a street corner even if I gave them away. I mean, it was terrible. But anyway, I had a wife and 6 kids, and Charlie's wife. Fortunately, they were really the salt, I guess, that flavored this whole organization because we spent every weekend working on this idea. And before we had to do that, naturally, we had to go ahead and get some money in this outfit.
Right.
Now, who was going to take 4 hicks from Montana, especially Troy, population 900, no street light, and loan them money? So I went ahead. My brother did the same thing, called up my mom. She was in Florida. And she wasn't wealthy at all, but her boys could do no wrong. So she went ahead and lent us each $8,000. Charlie, and I'll let him tell this side of the story.
Yeah, Mom and I had been saving for our oldest son's college education.
When you say mom, you're referring to
Yvonne, my wife.
Yeah, the saint of many.
And we had saved, and we had a little over $8,000 in the bank. And I drew the money out and throwed it in the pot. And so the 3 of us had put this organization was started with $24,000, and Dan Bowe was the pastor of our little church, and he didn't have no money, so we agreed to give him his share for the idea, because it was his idea bringing that brochure and talking it up a little bit. So that come to very near divorce time for me. Well, I went to high school and got married right out of high school. Been married 54 years this year, and raised 3 boys, and we was bound determined that our kids were going to go to college.
So how old were you guys at this time?
42.
42.
42.
Charlie's a lot older than I am, though. He's a 4th of July baby, and I'm the end of the year. So.
Yeah, I'm 6 months older and twice as smart.
So as you tell this story, Charlie, I want the listeners to think about if they are 42 plus or minus, or if they're not yet 42. If you were 42 years old, going and doing what Bob and Charlie and Bill is your brother's name, Bob. Think about going and withdrawing your life savings or borrowing money from a family member about a vision for something that you can't ever own. A vision of elk.
Geez, when you put it that way.
I mean, so go ahead, Charlie.
Well, at this point in at 73 or 73 this year, I guess it is. But it is a daunting thing to have done this, and I'd never do it again.
Bob, would you?
No question about it. I'm in the same boat.
I got kids older than 42, and if they had come up to me with an idea like this, I'd whap them in the head. They got to be nuts. And so, but looking back, and I tell our David and Rod, our CEO, Bob and I now travel around the country a lot, but how many organizations have accomplished this, what we have, in 31 years and are still alive?
Right.
You look at DU or a lot of the other conservation organizations, whoever started it has been long gone. And so it's an opportunity for us, Bob and I, to interact with the volunteers who are the backbone of the organization, that we're still on this planet Earth, which is an amazing deal in my mind.
Charlie, knock on wood, will you? I'll tell you what. I mean, it is mind-boggling when you think God works in mysterious ways. Well, this is exactly the case. Who would take? My brother owned a real. Check this out. I was not only dumb enough to have the only real estate office in a town of 900. I had 2 of them, and this was a time where you couldn't sell anything. anything. But that was my part of the bargain. Charlie was a logger, has been all his life, had his own outfit. And my brother lived in an A-frame, lived in the upstairs, and he could hardly stand up with his wife and 2 kids. And that was a drive-in restaurant. And Dan Bull was our pastor, who was probably a better elk hunter than he was a pastor. In fact, he actually had a beef jerky route, which we sent him on our first, after we had printed the Bugle magazine, we sent him on our first foray around the country, in the West anyway, to get the fish and game agencies to go ahead and let them know that we were here. So, I mean, it was the most inauspicious start of probably any organization ever turned into a nonprofit in this last century.
So it's not like you guys threw $24,000 in the bank and everything was roses from that point forward.
Oh no, Munson had this. Well, we was fortunate. We got, I think, we went to Spokane and we got hosed on a deal where we had this. This guy took us in. He had a monogram shirt. I'm sitting there in my logging clothes, and Munson, of course, he's a realtor. He kind of halfway dressed up. And here comes this guy in with this monogram shirt, and I'll never forget, he had a 4-color Heidelberg press, and then we were going to print these brochures. And so we had a list of 43,000 non-resident hunters from Colorado, I think it was.
Yeah, and about 17,000 of them were from Montana.
17,000 from Montana. And we'd hired two consultants in Spokane, Washington. They had 3 bar stools in a rented room with 1 light hanging down like we'd being interrogated at a jailhouse somewhere.
They took us to the cleaners for $500 for an hour's talk.
Oh no!
And the only thing they had in terms of showing us their prowess and their business acumen was we just sold and went gangbusters and did 10% on a mailing to a grave site sale or something like that.
Yeah, it was selling tombstones or grave sites or something. But they assured us that we could expect a 5% response with these 43,000 brochures.
Right. And now you multiply that. I mean, you got 43,000 times $5. You're thinking, how much money is that? Well, as it turned out, after hiring half the high school in Troy, the girls, because my daughter was a junior, we wound up using them. Our office was my real estate office, which was a double-wide motorhome on the corner of Wilderness Plateau, which was not selling. It was pretty desolate out there. Anyway, we had the girls in the garage, and it was the middle of getting fall, and we were burning a heater in the garage, and they were out stuffing envelopes, and we sent out 43,000 brochures. When I expect 5% of that.
So 2,100, 2,200 is what you expect.
Well, no, what is that? 43,000 at $10. Yeah, we're somewhere in that area.
Okay.
Well, $15 a piece.
Times
though.
$15.
Yes,
So
exactly.
2,000 responses times $15.
Yeah.
So $30,000.
Yeah,
maybe.
we're in high cotton.
Yeah.
If that happens.
Yes, right. Well, as we found out, unfortunately, once they went out, we're racing to the mailbox. After the first day, we got one.
Well, let me interrupt you a minute,
ahead.
because after anticipation, they had an auction sale at the Forest Service in Libby, and they had an automatic letter opener. We bought that for $5 or $15 because we was anticipating all these things coming in. We weren't going to have time to open these envelopes, so we got this thing that shot them envelopes through to open them up.
I don't know if we still got that, but we used it. We used it for manicures for a while, I think.
So you send out 43,000. Every day you run and stick your head in the mailbox, and what's happening?
Yeah, well,
233 members.
Yeah.
At the end.
Oh.
That's after it peaked. I mean, it went up to about 17 or 21, maybe it was our highest day, and we were celebrating and saying, can you imagine when this keeps going? Well, then it was really the sad time came to Troy.
Uh-oh.
And you get that feeling that goes right down to your toes where you say, wow, can we do this?
Yeah.
And we'd work all week Charlie was logging at the time, and I was still trying to sell real estate, but there was nothing to sell. So we would talk, and we would meet usually on the weekend for a day or two, and we'd meet at the Four B's restaurant in Libby, which was 18 miles from Troy. And it was tough times, let me tell you. We'd sit there with our wives, and we'd say, what do we do now? And you know, one thing about the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, I'll say it's probably the thing I'm most proud, is that after 31 years, when you say you're going to do something or you make a promise, you fulfill it, or you die trying. So we went ahead and decided we had an obligation to 233 members and told them we were going to supply them with a magazine. So,
Yeah. But to talk a little bit about the magazine, and as we travel around these days, the flagship of the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation has been the Bugle magazine. You go
Tremendous publication.
You go anywhere and ask people, the early members, why did you join the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation? Back east or anywhere, and they picked up a Bugle magazine somewhere. But Munson, you know, nothing is slow for Munson. He's doing 120,000 miles an hour at all times. And he said, we got to put this magazine. And we had promised the people we would have a magazine coming out in the fall of '84.
So did it ever enter your mind to just send these 233 people their money back?
Exactly. I was in favor of, but we didn't have 200. We didn't have the money.
Yeah, it would have been different if we had, $5,000 in the bank or whatever. But such is not the case, and that was our biggest problem. Okay, we decide we're going to make the commitment. Now, where do we get the money? And we knew we needed to borrow about $25,000 to go ahead. Well, I mean, we didn't think about just publishing this. We had already told these people that this was going to be a four-color publication and the whole 9 yards. So we went ahead and we ran out of friends real quick. So that was not an option. And our banker wouldn't even talk to us. He slammed the door and caught Charlie's foot in the door, I think, when we saw us coming. And so my brother knew an airline pilot who was just killing the stock market back then. So he talked this airline pilot from Pennsylvania who didn't know an elk from an aardvark. And he loaned us $25,000.
Whoa.
But tell him, 25% interest.
Yeah, 25% interest. Yes, you're right.
Yeah.
We didn't understand usury laws back then. So anyway, we wound up going ahead and putting this magazine together. But then the reality set in. How do you put a magazine together? Well, I don't know how we wound up with 52 pages, how we wound up with 4-color, but we were not going to do it second class. So we hired a guy by the name of Lance Shelvin because one of the brokers that worked at my real estate office knew this guy that worked with the Forest Service, and he put on great slideshows. So that gave us some idea that he might have some abilities than other things graphic. So we got him to the office, and we're talking to him about putting together a slideshow for some of the local community. We could tell them then, this is the organization. He said, wait a minute, what's your timeline? Don't you need to put a magazine together? So we hired Lance for $500. He had a light table in his basement. And literally in about a month and a half, maybe 2 months, we put 52 pages worth of information, stories. I mean, got some advertising, which we begged, and
most of it was free.
Yeah, most of it was free.
Cool Dry didn't.
Yeah,
Cool Dry sent us a small check.
Yeah, but I'll tell you what, we had some people from both Weatherby and Omark Industries, Spear Bullets, et cetera, that said, this thing might fly. So we wound up putting our first publication together, the premier issue of Bugle. And I remember on a Sunday, we didn't even see a blue line because we didn't know what a blue line was. And it came out of Hard Press, Minnesota. Sunday morning, we get it at 9 a.m. We go down from Missoula in a rental truck, and unfortunately, it's my brother. And the worst part about this is with him is the airline pilot, our financier. So we're off to Missoula. We truck down to Missoula. He opens up this 16-wheeler, and there in the back of it are 5 pallets of magazines, more magazines than I've ever seen in my life, 32,000 magazines. And we cracked open one of them. I remember sitting down on a box of bugles, my brother next to me, the financier, our pilot, airline pilot across from us, and then Tom Northey, the owner of the transfer company, who came in on a Sunday morning, who is now a life member and always has been. But anyway, we crack open this magazine, and after no one says anything, my heart's beating 1,000,000 miles an hour, and I'm thinking this is looking pretty good until the financier, the airline pilot, says, "Holy crap, it'll never sell." So about that time, we had to pick ourselves up off the bed of the truck, unload the 5 pallets, and we headed back to Troy.
Yeah.
With the idea that you're going to mail these magazines, or you're going to distribute them?
We didn't know what we were going to do.
We had no clue.
Magazine rack.
We put them at 7-Elevens on the way back. They put them in little wherever somebody sold sporting goods or gas or anything, and didn't have no contract. Just when you sell them, send us the money. and
it was amazing. It was amazing. So then, it's interesting what can motivate people. Fear is a good motivator.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So we wound up getting a hold of about, I don't know how many, some 200 to 300 game license agents in the West. We went ahead and sent them copies of Bugle magazine. We got paid for those, but that only got rid of, a few copies to speak of, and we had 30,000 we had to get rid of. We were doing retail. We had a couple people that saw the magazine, said, "Can I help you distribute it?" Good example again, the guy that's been with us for 31 years, he's a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force in Mountain Home, Idaho.
Oh.
He took up the cause and said, "I want to distribute these for you just because I think it's a great opportunity." He did it for free, and he got a buddy, and he got rid of 1,000 or 2,000 copies. But we knew the writing was on the wall. We were going to eat these things for the rest of our lives if we didn't move them. So we got a hold. My brother and I sat down, closed the door, got on 2 telephones, and we started telemarketing to wholesalers.
Okay.
And let me tell you, after hearing from 20 some odd wholesalers that, number one, you don't have a barcode. And we said, "What's a barcode?" Number 2, why did you build a regional name like that? And what the heck is Bugle? We don't even know what it means. So we had all these things stacked against us. But here's when I guess tenacity and the Lord sitting in and putting a special blessing on this thing came into fact that I called a lady that we nicknamed the Iron Maiden at Denver News in Colorado. And on the 14th call, after about a week and a half, she finally said, "Well, let me see if Mr. Littleman is in." And she said, "This is Bob, right?" And I said, "Yeah, how are you?" And I mean, she knew me by name. I felt like she might want to adopt me. But anyway, nothing. I figured I'd get the same thing. "I'm sorry, he's on the phone." But all of a sudden, this man answers the phone. He says, "Is this Bugle?" And I said, "Yes, it is." And he said, "How soon can you get me 2,000 copies?" Well, we just jumped up, high fives after that, and then it was dominoes. We just went from a circle from Denver News and said to every wholesaler in the state, and then I radiated from there, "This is the hottest publication in the entire world. Pick it up." And so we moved them. They went.
Oh, God.
After that, why, and Munson never slows down. So immediately he said, "We got to have a national convention." We ain't even got the Bugle out the door, and he's already spending more money. So we go to Spokane, Washington, which is the biggest town. Everybody, that was where you went to shop or doctor and so on, because Spokane was big city to us. And so we walked through the convention center. Well, we didn't have a clue. We can't go there. We ended up in a small Sheraton.
Yeah, it was
hotel.
a Sheraton.
And I told Bob, and the odds of this are really great. Right then is about the time that really Boone and Crockett heads and stuff in the early 80s, people were paying attention. And that was a big deal, the score. And I told Bob, I said, if we can get the top 4 heads in the world to Spokane, I don't care. People in my area or in our area that are elk hunters, they want to see the big elk heads.
Yeah.
And so I don't know how we did it, but we had the number 1, 2, 3, and 4 elk heads in Spokane, Washington. And Bob was doing all the planning because I was working.
Logging.
Yeah. And he got the hotel booked for Easter weekend, which was another sign of brilliance on his part.
Well, let me tell you, it was the only weekend available, and we had already selected the date, and here we weren't even a year old as an organization, but getting those heads was a different. We had the Plute Bull from Dark Canyon, Colorado, and it was the number 1 head, and they said, what are you, crazy? We're not going to give you this head. And I said, well, what if we insure it? So anyway, we got 4 policies for $100,000 each from Lloyd's of London, and they didn't know who we were either, but we actually got the paperwork and said, we're insured. So then we got the number 2 bull from a museum in Jackson Hole. Number 3 bull, the Mercer bull from Montana.
3 was from Clarence Brown. 4 was the Mercer bull out of Montana.
Yep.
And so we had that there, and we had rolled the dice.
Yeah.
We had no money, and we had, I think, 16 or 18 little exhibitors. We charged them $50 a piece to sell their wares.
Yeah.
And but we had Jack Ward Thomas, Harlan Carter. We had some big names: Larry Jones, Dwight Shue,
Jim Zumbo, Pat McManus.
We had a bunch of the people from the hunting community and the outdoor community had come to that convention. In fact, Jack Ward was the keynote speaker. Jack Ward Thomas. We run up a hotel bill of $42,000 and some odd dollars.
Oh my goodness!
And we sold a rifle. That's a story in itself. We had a rifle there that Gentry built, and it was a silent auction kind of a thing. And one of the guys had to leave was Aaron Jones, and he said, "I don't care what that rifle costs. I want to buy it." Well, it got up to $1,400, and so we bid $1,500, and that was a high bid on that rifle. And then we was all scared to call him on Monday morning to say he paid $1,500 for this rifle, but it was the best buy he ever made, and it created a great relationship in that fashion. But we took in just over $44,000 or something. We come out of there in the black.
Wow.
But we still had no money.
Yeah,
I was afraid because we had Charlie in his pickup truck outside during the entire convention, warmed up in case we had to bail out of town fast.
So all this time, your wives are
scared,
raising the kids.
Yes.
You guys are working your jobs plus doing this. And the wives are kind of quasi-widows at this point.
No,
right?
not really. My wife...
Vicky was right beside Bob.
Okay.
I've got 6 kids, so there were 6 kids at home, ranging from age 2 up to about 17, because my son went to school that fall. Charlie and I knew, though, we needed... I don't know how we made this decision, but we bought an Apple IIe computer. But Charlie still can't tie his shoes, so that was not something he was getting into. And I was scared to death of anything but a Royal, where you pound the keys.
Right.
So anyway, my wife opened it up, and she entered member number 1 on an Apple IIe computer in our living room while kids are running all over the house. So that was the start.
That was the start. And so it was a humble beginning and a lot of sweat and tears to where it is today. It's amazing. And but we were committed, and we just couldn't bring ourselves. There were several times the first year and a half or 2 that if we could have quit and give the money back to the people that sent their money in, we would have quit, I think. Yeah. But morally, Bob or I couldn't do it. We would go down swinging,
keeping your word,
and just to be honest with the folks. So the second year, we had a national convention at Denver, Colorado. Now we're going big city, big time, so on and so forth. And that's the place we had we had probably 40 or 50 booths.
We had 100 booths.
100 booths, and we had attendance. We had the first year. I think we might have auctioned a few things off, but now we had a full blown auction, and we had an auctioneer out of Idaho that was supposed to be there, and the auction was on Friday and Saturday. Maybe it was on Saturday. I don't remember. Saturday, and he calls Friday night and says, "I can't make it." Oh, so here we got this auction on the block, and we got nobody, no auctioneer, no nothing. we got some merchandise, and Merritt Pride said, "Well, I can auction a little bit," and there was a bunch of outfitters there. Well, we can run the Rinku, and then we got a bunch from Oregon. It's an interesting story. These guys had just sold a business, and they wanted to buy a bunch of hunts, and their accountant told them they had like $78,000, so they were going to spend. And they got in the VO and the Seagrams and that stuff, and they spent about $78,000 or something at that banquet buying hunts.
At the auction.
At the auction.
Oh my goodness.
And the guy is still a friend to this day, and he stopped the other day, and when they got home, his accountant had made a mistake. They only had $36,000 to spend, so they had to go borrow another to pay that deal off. But that's when we had Bill's wife, Ann, had a little baby in a stroller, and she had a big sack to put the money in, and then she'd
like
go
cash, like $100 bills.
Oh yeah.
This is for the younger listeners. This is way before credit cards or even PayPal accounts.
Right.
This is like Andrew Jackson's and Ben Franklin's in a bag.
It was.
Exactly.
And then she'd fill that sack up and go to the room and throw it on the bed. And we didn't know safes had the motel had safes to put that stuff in. So we were scared to have too much running around at one time. So she'd just take that money and throw it. And here's a big mound of money on the bed. And I remember when I was a kid, when Scrooge would get in that money and roll in that money, I wanted to roll in that money.
I'll tell you what, though, it was crazy because we had, in terms of what you think, well, you're a CPA for crying out loud. You would not have wanted to look at our books. We had brought home the girl that was handling our finances at that point in time. She was a high school student. We sent her home with a bowling bag with about $38,000 cash on the airplane. Because, it was a Sunday and the banks weren't open, and we hadn't opened an account there, so it was...
so this is like 1985,
85.
So high school girls on an airplane with $38,000 of cash.
Exactly.
Oh my goodness.
It's in a bowling bag. You can see it.
So people, if this isn't starting to paint a picture to you of
total incompetence, I'd say.
Total incompetence overcome by absolute dedication, values, commitment, and probably some divine intervention along the way.
Clearly.
But we left Denver, and at that point, Bob and I would agree on this, that's when we thought the Elk Foundation is going to make it. We come out of there, and we had some profit. We had a little bit of wiggle room at that point in time. But the thing that we needed to do and hadn't done is we needed to get our name up that we're doing something with this money.
Right.
So we conned the Forest Service. We did a burn out of Troy, Montana, about an auction. It was our first project, to do a project to say we're creating habitat and so on.
Yeah.
And then comes along a project in Montana that really puts our names in lights. And here again, Munson. Jim Flynn calls, said, the Elk Foundation, we got this project on Rob Creek. We need $1 million. Could you guys?
That was $2 million.
$2 million. Well, we got $1 million.
Well, we got $1 million. The way it worked, he called and he said, "Hey, Bob, this and
Jim Flynn was
the director of Fish and Wildlife
and Parks.
Now we were still nothings at this point in time, and we were 3 years old, and we were paying our bills, but that was about it. But Jim calls up because we were getting memberships in, and he calls up and he said, Bob, Jim Flynn, I'm the director of Montana Department of Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. I was wondering if you guys would consider doing a job for us. And I said, sure. And he explained that there's this grazing association. It was 30,000 acres, 17,000, I think, were in the association as leased land, and the other was deeded, and it was adjacent to the Blacktail Game Range in Montana.
Yeah.
They were afraid they were going to sell it because there were 7 ranching families involved, and if they sold it, it would probably be developed, and they'd be stuck with the Blacktail next door. And if we could pick it up, then it would be more land for more elk habitat.
Right.
So I said, yeah, what are you talking about? And he said, well, we can't give you a contract, but we can promise that if you buy it and hold it on an option for a year, we will pay you $2 million. And I said, $2 million? And he said, yeah, that's what it's going to take to put the deal together. Well, I didn't act real scared until I hung up the phone and was shaking. But I called the first person, who was Wallace Pate. And Wallace Pate was our first chairman of the board. And he was a dynamic individual from South Carolina. He had come to our convention in Salt Lake, in Denver. And it was interesting because the only reason we knew about him is in Denver. When we left Denver, we hired our second field director, who was Gary Wolf.
Yeah.
And I remember having him up in the room where all the money was. And Charlie and I, this was the general manager of Vermejo Park, the largest hunting ranch in the country at that time in New Mexico. Gary, just the timing was right. It was just providence, I think. And we hired Gary for $24,000 and said we need a field director for the northern half of the United States.
Southern half.
Southern half, yeah. And Charlie said, well, I only got one question for you, Gary. Do you have a savings account? Because we had a philosophy in those days, and the philosophy was called sing for your supper.
Yeah.
And if you didn't sing and make the money, you didn't get the supper. So anyway, as it turned out, Gary knew from the fact that he was at Vermejo Park that Wallace came with his daughter and wound up hunting with him.
Okay.
And then Wallace came to the convention. So he lived on Arcadia Plantation in South Carolina. I literally called up Wallace on the phone, introduced myself because I hadn't met him in Denver. He flew out in his airplane and met at our 8th chapter, which was in Fort Collins, Colorado. And I met him, and it was the neatest thing in the world because Wallace, we went out after the banquet, and we were sitting having a drink together, and I explained the situation. I said, Wallace, we need a chairman of the board because right now there's 3 of us, Charlie, my brother, and I, and we were the Elk Foundation. So in terms of a board, that was it. So I said, Wallace, would you consider being our chairman of the board? And he said, Bob, I'd be honored if you would have me in that capacity, but if not, I'm here for you anyway.
Wow.
And that's the kind of voice that Wallace had an impact on the organization, and it was so representative of so many people. But how that ties in with the call from Jim Flynn is to get $2 million, we had to come up with almost $1 million of our own. And then the Federal Land Bank would loan us $1 million until we got the payout from the University of from Montana State. So Wallace ponied up $250,000. Otto Teller from the Teller Wildlife Range, Teller Refuge in Stevensville.
Didn't Wallace put up 500 and?
Well, he did, because this is what happened, and we got another $250 from the folks.
Sargent.
Yeah, Len and
Sandy Sargent.
Sandy Sargent, yeah. And these were people that did it based on a written note that was just basically scrawled out on a piece of paper.
Wow.
And it was not backed up by anything but the Montana Promise, which was made by the director. And then before Christmas, we had to pay off one of those notes, and I had to call Wallace and ask him, whether he would go ahead and loan us another $250. And he said, how fast do you need it? And I said, well, like 2 or 3 days. And at that time, I got a check within 3 days from Wallace, and it was $250,000. So he was into it for $500,000. Now imagine this, because we were just literally this brand new organization. He was chairman of the board. But I'll tell you what, Montana came through. We had an attorney, Phil Tawney from Missoula, that this guy was a better hunter and mule skinner probably than an attorney, but he could sit down and charm your socks off. And to put 7 disparate ranching families together in an agreement was nothing short of miraculous. But it was so neat because when we closed that deal, we did it in Virginia City.
Montana.
In the elk lodge there with elk heads on the wall. We had tables lined up and we had like 14 signatures from 14 different family members that were needed. It was cool. And it was one of those second things where we said, we're going to try it and make it happen. And I think God provided the answers and the financing, and it was a done deal. And it put us on the map because at the same time, we had looked for $2 million for a loan from Anheuser-Busch, which was a joke, really.
Right.
But as it turned out, we met a guy by the name of Ray Goff, who sat on our board of directors eventually. Ray had enough faith in us and in Montana because he loved it out here. Anheuser-Busch, he was in charge of their worldwide operations for growing.
Okay.
So he came out and finally, we were negotiating on $2 million loan, and we never heard anything for a while. And then Ray said, well, you got to come out to St. Louis. And I went out there with Phil Tawney, and he was our attorney again. And Ray said, I got bad news for you. We can't loan you $2 million, but we're going to donate $500,000.
Oh.
So, that flat out put us on the map and was the most exciting thing. And what it started is a trust fund for us, which we called the North American Habitat Fund. And that $500,000 was gold. It gave us credibility. It gave us the ability to go ahead and start operating like a real business and get some competent people to run it.
To even get to that point is so miraculous. I'm lucky I live in Montana. I live maybe 100 miles from what's now the Rob Ledford Wildlife Management Area. And I go over there because I'm reading about this in Bugle magazine about this time. And I didn't get to know you guys till another 7 or 8 years after that. And even today when I drive by it, I almost look for where's the divine spirit on this mountain? Because sometimes things just are going to happen. And for you guys to get it to that point, risk all you had, and like you said, Charlie, a lot of times you just didn't know any better.
Well, we were hard-headed and stubborn and not very bright. But I want to think that our word is a bond and golden. You don't see much happening anymore on a handshake or somebody trying to figure out how to screw you out of something. But I think we were raised in a different time, and I hold a lot that when we say something, Bob's the same way. If we say something, we're going to do it. And I think, in hindsight, that's been one of the big assets of the Elk Foundation is when we said we're going to do something, come heck or high water, we're going to do it. If we make that statement. And I think that's still true today.
I agree. I've been on the board now for 3 years, and I was on committees for 2 years before coming on the board. And the very first board meeting I sat in on as a committee member, not as a board member, it became so obvious that when the Elk Foundation says, we're going to do this, or this was our promise, everybody puts their shoulder to the wheel and make sure that promise gets delivered.
Yeah, no doubt about it. You know, in reflection, you look back, people ask you, well, when did you think that it was really going to happen? And I think it just happened when we really recognized that this organization is going to be driven by the people that understand the resource. I mean, there's nothing more majestic than a bull elk and
Right.
elk in general. They understand the landscape and God's creation, which is to every day you get out in it. Let's face it, whether it's butterflies or wildflowers or critters of all sorts, it's magnificent. But you know, the common denominator that makes this organization go, and the real bottom line, is the people,
Right.
because their passion as elk hunters and people that enjoy God's creation.
Well, it's the people, and Bob hit it on the head. And we've talked about this. It truly is a large family.
You guys approach it that way. Everybody who you guys meet, myself included, from when I first met you, you feel like I got invited to your family reunion.
And we talk about that as we travel around. How we captured that or how that happened, we don't know. But we go back east in several places, and you sit down at a banquet back in Atlanta, Georgia. You sit down with 8 people you've never seen in your life, and you leave that night, you've got 8 friends. And we see that happen time and time again, and we marvel at that. How did that happen? And I've come to the conclusion that there's some values. It's God, family, and country. It's the values that our founding fathers found this country on.
Yeah.
And it permeates through the organization with our people, with our membership, with the people. We have a core value and a common value that at this point in history, I think we're getting away from, and it concerns me.
Yeah.
That's just...
No, but I think you're right, Charlie, in that's still part of the attraction of saying, this is the course I started on, and this is the course I'm going to stay. And if the world of politics or political correctness or whatever wants to drag everyone else out in the weeds, I'm staying on this path. And if before a banquet I'm going to get up and we're going to say the Pledge of Allegiance, guess what? That's what we do. And if you don't like it, well, I don't know what to tell you. That's who we are.
That's who we
You
are.
got it.
And
You know, it's so amazing when you think about it. I mean, in this world right now where the external environment is so crazy and people are questioning values and they're trying to figure how does that logically make sense, whether it's a governmental action or what goes on in the world, all of the political correctness, etc. And I'm convinced our growth and people that give in this organization for the resource and what they're doing are people that are so tired of the externals that are so filled with misleading information and challenges that just overwhelm people, and a lack of coherency in anything logical, governmentally or regulation-wise. And in the Elk Foundation, let me tell you, people feel from their gut that this is something worthwhile.
Yeah.
It's built into them, just like a hunting instinct is.
yeah,
And it's marvelous.
One thing that comes across really clear talking to you guys, talking to some of the longtime staff that's been here, even when I talk to some of these board members who were on the board 20, 25 years ago, is they never questioned why they were doing this. They might stumble on how we're going to do it, but the why was always there. And when I talk to you guys and we have a lot of fun discussions, I walk away and I say, you know what? That's why I'm doing it. That's why Bob started it. That's why Charlie's doing it. That's why they started it. That's why they took the risks. And that's why it's important for me. And hopefully listeners listen to this stuff and they walk away or they understand that why. You guys do a really good job of getting to why this is important.
Well, it's you know, when you've got a public trust, which a 501c3 is, that's who you're dealing with. It's a trust. So every dollar that comes into this organization, we have what we call a 90% goal, and it's recognized. I mean, I'm amazed when I look at Charity Navigator, which is the the outfit that actually rates nonprofits throughout the country, and most of them major nonprofits, over 8,000 now. And for the last 6 out of 7 years, we've had a 4-star rating.
Highest rating they give.
Yeah.
Highest rating they give. And what it means, it puts us in a position where in the top 3% of nonprofits in the country, and you analyze 8,000, that means we've got 240 organizations that are peer level with us, and you rate it on 3 things: mission, accountability, whether you're doing your mission, accountability, and transparency. I'd like to think we've got some of the best accountability of where every dollar goes and how many people through what we call a PAC project can generate money for an organization and then guide where it goes in their state for the best interest of the resource.
Yeah.
And the other 2, accountability and transparency, the U.S. government should take a look at what we do and start modeling.
Yeah. Well, when you talk about people, and you guys I hear it all the time in this organization, when you come to headquarters here, from staff to board to whoever, it's about people. And yeah, it's all for the cause of elk, other wildlife, their habitat, and our hunting heritage. But you say Wallace Pate was your first chairman.
Right.
And he's no longer with us, but each year the Elk Foundation gives an award to someone who's done remarkable work on behalf of elk and conservation. And that award is named after him. Phil Tawney's no longer with us. There's even... You guys, we could spend the next 3 hours with you guys listing off people who touched this organization in some way and guided it.
Champions.
Yeah.
I mean, look at a guy like, this is where it's so amazing. On our trips in the early days, back and forth to Spokane, whether to talk to our attorney or get fleeced by some other person. For whatever reason, in the early days, Dan Bull, again, who had the idea, Dan found out the address in Spokane of Pat McManus. So these guys, I think we drew straws and I got the short straw. So they dumped me off on a street corner and I go down the street to Pat's house. I knock on the door and unannounced, and he opens the door and I said, "Mr. McManus, I'm Bob Munson. We started the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation. Can you help us?" And he said, "What?" So anyway, he invited me in. He had written a story called The Elk Trappers in one of his books.
Yeah.
It's funnier than heck. Anyway, we asked him if he would give us that for the premier issue, the rights to reprint it. Well, he had to go through publishers and the whole 9 yards. He did it in spades. And I saw Pat at a book signing in Libby, Montana about 5 years ago. And this was, after 25 years when he had first done that. And he said, "Munson, when you came to the door, I shut the door when you left, and I said to my wife, 'Those guys are starting a national elk organization.'" And he laughed. But I'll tell you what, for the first 10 years at every elk camp, our annual convention, he was there signing books and personally was just sold out to this outfit, as was Jim Zumbo and Dwight Shue and guys that have the heart for what this outfit's all about.
Yeah, the list goes so long. I mean, for our listener, because a lot of our listeners never got to read Pat's work as the humor stories in the back of, was it Outdoor Life or Field
Outdoor Life?
Outdoor Life,
yeah.
I used to read those and laugh so hard. And it was humor that didn't need vulgarity or anything.
Wholesome humor.
Yeah.
And in fact, my uncles call me Rancid. One of Pat's famous characters was Rancid Crabtree. And so my uncles call me Rancid after Pat McManus. So anyhow, if you are listening to this, you should go and look for some of Pat's stuff. But we go from so many names that we don't have time to mention them all.
Right.
So now we got to kind of put them in what are today. We don't like to make them just numbers because every one of them is an important person. But the Elk Foundation has 11,000 volunteers.
Yeah.
You think about how big of a volunteer army that is on behalf of conservation.
Yeah.
11,000. And these aren't 11,000 people who just say, oh, yeah, I'll come and I'll run a bake sale Saturday morning once a year and be done with it.
It's unbelievable the amount of work. We have people that take their vacations a week ahead of their banquet to put a banquet on.
Yeah.
They take a week of their life to put on a banquet. And how hard those volunteers work is unbelievable. And they raise in excess, 20 million bucks or something of that nature, putting on banquets throughout the country. But that's not easy.
No, it's not.
It's hard work.
And what amazes me is when I go to one of the field projects, there will be a father and a mother there, and there might be 4 of their kids there. It's one of those organizations where the spirit is, you might have expertise, you might have money, you might have time, you might have hard work and grit. Whatever you have, come and employ it to the cause of conservation.
Yeah.
And
It covers the whole gamut.
It's so amazing. You look at we are having a lot of 25th anniversary banquets because the chapters were started, that long ago.
Yeah.
We went to one a couple years ago in Spokane. That was one of our first chapters, and they were a 25th anniversary silver celebration. And let me tell you, we like to celebrate and have fun. And that, if you can't do that, you're in the wrong program because you need to go ahead and celebrate your successes, and the people are so energetic. But it was time to give out, where they started in Spokane, they give out pins, annual pins for committee service.
Yeah.
There were 10 couples that for
20 people.
25 years
Wow.
had been at every banquet and on that committee. And it was a point now where they were tied in, and they got together monthly throughout the entire year. And they didn't just work. I mean, they had a lot of fun, but they were family.
Yeah.
And that's what people who go to a banquet anywhere, you'll be welcomed, as Charlie said. If you join a committee, I guarantee you will build a new set of friends and people that you can count on, that they're all of the same stripe. And by that, I mean, they're going to be different. You're going to see doctors, lawyers, you're going to see loggers and garbage men, but people that have the heart for what we care about.
For sure. And even though I'm on the board, our local committee in Bozeman, Montana, I just want to go there and be a volunteer. Right?
Yeah.
I'll do whatever I can do. And I'm sitting there with 25 other people. And I'm sure they're thinking, is Newberg down there about ready to doze off? And really what I'm doing is just marveling at, okay, this person owns a little storefront. This person drives a cement truck. This guy's an engineer. This lady's a secretary. And here they come every Thursday night for 12 weeks or 10 weeks. And when they leave there, they go ask for donations. And for the days before the event, they're working on the setup. And the day of the event, they take the whole day, and their kids are there helping. And it's like, wow, this is an attachment to conservation. And they take so much pride in that event being a good event, that the money is going to go to a good cause, that some of it's going to go to what you called, Bob, the PACs, the Project Advisory Committee project.
Exactly.
They know that they're going to see it going to work on the landscapes, both nationally and some maybe where they hunt or camp. And it's so that's 11,000 volunteers doing some amazing stuff.
No question.
And then 205,000, is that where it's at now? 205,000 members?
Members, 205.
I mean, could you guys have ever dreamed? I mean, did you even dare dream to that scale at the time?
No.
No, there's no way. But you know what's so interesting in that membership, which again grows every year, and think about sustainability. It's hard to sustain those sorts of numbers, especially when 2008 rolled around, 2009, the crunch. Yet in 2008, we had about 150,000 members. And now we're looking at 7-8 years later, and we've been growing every year, and we're up to 205,000. Why? Again, because of doing what we say we're going to do, and people getting involved and understanding this is something that makes a difference, that counts, that stands the test of time.
Yeah, it's remarkable, and for me, I'm 50. I almost I like all the other conservation groups too. I mean, I'm members of everything from A, B, C to XYZ
Right.
because they're all doing good work. But 31 years is how old this organization is. That
Yep.
31?
May 14th.
May 14th. Not that anyone's tracking it, right, Charlie?
Yeah, right.
But, so I think about this for people my age. You know, if you think about Boone and Crockett Club, it started in the 1800s, and it's a fantastic group. But this is something that started in my lifetime when I was of adult age. It's a marvel to me that I think we get. And we have a tendency to think, oh, America, the good old days are behind us. You know, the average American just doesn't have what it takes. If there's anything that's living proof that in America you can still dream big and do big and follow that dream,
It's possible.
It's possible.
It is.
The Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation is one of the many shining examples.
I believe that in
of
spades.
that.
Yeah.
When Charlie and I travel around and we meet committee folks, they love to say, wow, thank you for what you're doing. And we say, wait a minute, it's not for what we're doing, it's for what you're doing. And I totally believe this, that it's like we're just getting dressed for the ball. We're just warming up.
Yeah, we're just getting started. The potential is so great out there. We just don't have enough time and energy to get to it, but we're going to get there. We're just starting.
Yeah.
We're just cracking the nut now.
You know, it seems like we just celebrated a year and a half ago 6 million acres that we've either enhanced or acquired throughout the country.
And protected in some way.
Protected
Yeah.
totally. And much of which, in fact, over 750,000 acres became access available
Right.
to anybody that wants to recreate or fish or hunt on now Forest Service or state grounds that are open to hunting. So that's a real landmark situation for the Elk Foundation. And yet within the next couple months, we will reach $1 billion that we have been able to, with our partners, put on the ground that are tangible dollars in one of our 5 program areas. That's mind-boggling.
That is amazing. Because we were talking about that in a board meeting. It's like right now 987 million.
Yeah.
So hopefully people can think about that between the Elk Foundation and the partners that they can work with, whether it's Forest Service or private partners or whatever.
We typically get, Randy, for every dollar that we make and put on the ground for the resource, we're usually getting a 5 to 7 match or leverage from whoever we work with.
Yeah.
So our dollar is worth 5 to 7 Forest Service dollars or BLM dollars or a state agency.
Yeah.
It's huge.
That's so remarkable. And so Randy comes at all of this through the eyes of a hunter. I mean, anyone who knows me just says, well, he's a hunter. He might be a CPA. He might be whatever. He's a hunter.
Right.
The membership of the Elk Foundation is mostly hunters.
Mostly hunters.
Over what, 95%.
95%.
And
Yeah.
and everyone's welcome. You don't have to be a hunter
Exactly.
at all. But and again, I'm going to be biased here when I say this. So, you know, some people are going to yawn when I say it, but for the most part, there is just a fortitude, a level of sincerity, of grounded value of people who hunt. And I think it comes from their attachment to the landscape.
Yep.
It comes from the fact that they see the world differently because that's where we get food. No healthy landscape, no food.
No.
That is most basic component.
Yep.
Healthy landscapes are required for food. Whether you buy your food at the grocery store or like us, we go and get it out in the woods when we're hunting or fishing or picking huckleberries or whatever. And when you have that basic connection to the land, it becomes so valuable to you. And some people are going to say, well, how can a logger and a realtor have any care about the land.
I don't think that a logger or anybody that works with the land, a farmer, nobody cares more about the land. And you got to differentiate, in my opinion, between conservation and preservation.
Right.
We're caretakers. The good Lord put everything on this ground. We should partake in it, but we should caretake it. Our goal at the Elk Foundation, and mine in a way, is I want to leave this as good or a better place when I leave than when I started. And I think the Elk Foundation's done a good job of that. But we got to be caretakers. You can't just shut everything down. You can't name me one thing you use, do, or anything that don't come out of that earth. You got to take care of it. And I think that I'm biased, of course, with loggers, but we've picked fawns up, we've moved stuff in the woods when we're logging, and we care about every critter out there, and are very sensitive to everything on the landscape.
Yep.
But if you don't use it, Mother Nature will take care of it for you in the form of fire or some other
disease,
some other way. And so,
and my point in saying that, Charlie, is, like I said, I come from a logging family. My dad was a logger also, and fortunately, I was the worst logger in our family. So and I was the oldest son, and my dad pulled me aside and said, "Son, you're the worst logger I know. If I was you, I'd figure out a way to go to college because I can't afford it." And my brother got stuck in the logging business. But my point of this is, a lot of people, whether you're a hunter, logger, realtor, farmer, I don't care what, if you live in a lifestyle that connects you to the land in some way, you learn to value that land. Yep. And those people connected to it, I think, are the ones that go that extra mile, are going to volunteer or contribute or donate or advocate politically for the cause of that land.
Yep.
If anything, the work that Elk Foundation does is an expression of what Aldo Leopold wrote back in the 30s about the land.
Yeah.
Everything he wrote about went back to the land. And here we are, 80 years later from his writings, and most everything that Elk Foundation is focused on, and what you guys started with your first little was it a fire project up in Troy?
Our first project was a fire
controlled burn.
Controlled burn.
The first thing you guys started with was a project to make the land better.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that's, I have no idea how many projects the Elk Foundation has done.
Over 9,000.
9,000 projects.
And those are in a variety of our main focus areas, which again are habitat enhancement, which is the stewardship part of it, acquisition, easement, hunting heritage, reintroductions. Let me tell you something that
go on to that, Bob. That's I think
reintroductions.
Yeah,
I'll tell you why this warms my heart. Is I was privileged to be at the very first reintroduction we did, and it was accomplished in Hazard County, Kentucky. In fact, I now am an official Duke of Hazard. And,
you don't look like Daisy.
Well, I'll tell you what. It was bestowed upon me by the mayor of, I can't even remember what town there. But anyway, it was in December in 1997. And we were delivering our first 7 elk after, several years of fundraising and jumping through hoops to make it all possible. And we had 7 elk down in this old remediated coal field area, mountaintop mining. They'd been knocked off, and it was gorgeous country in its own right. But this trailer was there with the 7 elk inside, sort of in a ravine. There were 4,500 people on a. This was a week before Christmas in December. There were 52 school buses full of school children that were there to witness a reintroduction because elk had been extirpated some 150 years ago. So anyway, the governor flies in on his helicopter, and there are people around this bandstand area, and he proceeded to speak and spoke for about 20 minutes. And about 15 minutes of that, interestingly enough, since we were in Appalachia, so to speak, was we will not poach these animals. And I look back at that and I laugh. But anyway, after the governor was through, we all filtered over to this ravine, sort of the ridge around overlooking these elk, which were about 30 feet below. Still snow filtering through the air. And this is the truth, that when they opened the door, those elk ran probably, I guess, 30 yards at the most, and all 7 just stopped, and they were just trying to get their bearings. And the cloud just parted enough where the sun came down and raised and lit up that ravine. And I'll tell you what, I get goosebumps every time I tell this story.
Wow.
Imagine those kids.
Yeah.
And this organization is about what you can pass on to your children and grandchildren. I'm blessed with 18 grandchildren. I'm not Catholic or Mormon, but I just didn't know about Planned Parenthood, I guess, at the time. But anyway, it's a special outfit, and those reintroductions have led to another 8 states and Ontario and Canada have an elk.
And you think of how many people that's touched.
Oh, yeah.
To the cause of not just elk, but the cause of conservation, and put in their mind that whatever our landscape is today, it doesn't have to be that way.
Yep.
Think about a kid who maybe thought, oh, well, we'll never have elk in Kentucky or Tennessee or Arkansas or Missouri or Virginia or insert whatever state. And they got to see that. That probably forever changed their perception of what can be accomplished.
Exactly.
That we do not have to accept the paradigm of today. Because when I was 8 years old, I saw them bring elk to Kentucky.
Yeah.
I mean, that kind of stuff goes so much further than just, hey, there's some elk in the woods and we get to hunt them. It's so far beyond that. And the reintroduction part of elk excites me greatly to see. I was in the western part of Virginia this winter, not West Virginia, but the western part of Virginia, and they are excited about getting elk there, and that's recent. It's going to be there, and they're going to get their elk, or have got. They got them.
They got their elk
from Kentucky, right?
Yep.
So Kentucky has 10,000.
Oh, they got
elk?
more than that. They got about 14,000, I think. They.
That's crazy.
The amazing number to me, and you'll appreciate this, Randy, I probably, is that they're monitoring. And in West Yellowstone now, where we have the wolves,
right,
or in Yellowstone, we're getting, 6 to 10 or 12 calves per 100 cows.
Yeah.
You know, last year in Kentucky, 94 calves out of 100 cows reached their first birthday.
Oh, that's unheard of in the West. That's no wonder they got 14,000.
Yeah, that tells you quite a story. So,
well, it's stuff like that it just makes you feel good to be whether you're a member of the Elk Foundation, whether you're just an elk hunter who gets some of the benefits out of the work the Elk Foundation does. Today, if you were to take a snapshot, the Elk Foundation is basking in the glow of some great time, some great leadership, some great, whatever you want to call it. The tailwinds are there.
It's the best time in our history right now.
Right.
We are financially solid. We have the best staff of any conservation organization. We are on top of the world.
Yeah. But
It's
it couldn't
great.
have. There had to have been a few bumps in the road along the way.
Yeah.
I mean,
I got to get out of here in the next couple hours, but I could be here for 3 days on the bumps in the road.
I mean, nothing goes from its infancy to, you guys kind of brought us to about year 3 there in your story, but we've jumped forward to today. But are there any things that happened along the way where you say, boy, did we learn from that, or this made us better because we got through this, or anything?
We weren't afraid to try. But, I look back at some of the things that we did, like we were going to do a video magazine, and we did it for a brief period of time. It failed. We had a magazine for kids that was outstanding, the Wild Outdoor World. Mm-hmm. And we had that, and we finally got up to about 75,000 copies we were printing. It was going to state game departments, and they were buying it and sending it through their elementary schools. And that wouldn't have been sustainable, so we at the time pulled the plug on it. And then we recognized the simple fact that you can't be all things to all people.
Right.
And therefore, by keeping a focus on habitat and the critter and just doing good things for elk and recognizing that we can continue to recruit youth through reintroductions, through hunter ed classes, through getting involved at the banquet level with kids and family, like Charlie said, because it's a family orientation. Man, what you're doing is just monumental, but it's all taken work, countless thousands and millions of hours from tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of members.
Yeah. And so when you mentioned a few experiments there, Charlie, you said we could be here till tomorrow talking about the bumps in the road. What are the highest bumps that instantly came to your mind during that?
Well, I mean, 8 or 9 years ago, I wasn't sure we was going to make it 8 or 9 years ago. Financially, we were in trouble.
Yeah.
Economy was bad. We were spending money we didn't have, and we had to make a change in the leadership of our staff. And but honestly, I wasn't sure we was going to make it, and we did. But I can tell you, Randy, that the Lord just took us to the 11th hour so many times, and something would happen.
Yeah.
That would keep going, and that's the case straight through this organization to this day. We're on solid ground now. We have a pretty big endowment, $50 million or something of that nature that we just spend the interest on, and I feel good that we've laid the foundation for the next generation.
Yeah.
And but I couldn't say that 5 years ago that we would be in existence 5 years from now. But I think we're here. I feel now in the last couple of years that we're here to stay. But I don't. At no point in our first 28 years of history did I ever feel that comfort level that we would be here long term until the sale of the Double H Ranch, which was really a game changer for us, where we could set that endowment, because we was living hand to mouth in mid 2005, 6, 7. We was
tough.
It was tough, and so it's put us in a whole new league, in my opinion, in this industry, which is very competitive. I mean, you can look around and you can give your money to a lot of places.
Oh, every day I just open your mailbox. There's a lot of people who want it.
And so you better have the best story to tell and the best product out there. But the one thing that Bob touched on, we go back to, is you better be transparent and you better be honest.
Right.
And you better do what you say you're going to do. And that's been what's been a key for us, in my opinion.
Yeah. You mentioned a person there who has made a difference for where the Elk Foundation is today, and it's the Torstensen family.
No question.
A lot of people, there's some misconceptions that the Elk Foundation owns all these ranches. I hear it all the time. And so I just want to make sure that we go through that, because we're going to just clear the air here in case someone listening has been told at the bar over 2 drinks of how things work at the Elk Foundation. But the Elk Foundation does not own ranches.
No.
At one time, an estate, Mr. Torstensen's estate, said, I would like to grant this to the Elk Foundation.
Correct.
And you guys were kind of in that pickle of, and the listeners will say, what do you mean in a pickle? Gee, I wish someone would give me a 100,000 acre ranch. But you had to take it with some restrictions. You had to operate it according to what
the wishes.
All the wishes.
Right.
It was expensive to operate it that way. It's not like cattle prices at that time were what they were today. It was in New Mexico, so it's not like there's water just running down every little drainage. But again, a remarkable person steps forward and does something that is at his core, and I never met Mr. Torstensen before he passed. I've met his kids since then, and remarkable kids. Like kids, they're adults.
Right.
But in everything you read of him, everything you get when you talk to his family, it was about that land.
Yeah.
And he entrusted the 24 board members, the staff, the thousands of volunteers, and the hundreds of thousands of members of the Elk Foundation to do what was right with that land. And now we roll forward to, what was it, 3 years ago when the ranch sold?
Yep.
Yeah.
And so the family told the Elk Foundation, yeah, since it's expensive for property taxes, insurance, maintenance, everything, if you sell that ranch and put all of the proceeds in this endowment, you can spend a small percentage of it each year, as long as it makes money that year.
Mm-hmm.
And so, once again, some person steps in and gets the Elk Foundation over one more hurdle.
Yeah.
And over one more hurdle. And we know that we don't know how far the horizon is when we look at it. We just know there are hurdles all along the way.
Yep, no doubt about it.
And when someone like that comes along and helps you clear the hurdle and get back to your stride and get ready for the next hurdle, it's remarkable. And again, what was he at his core? You ask anybody who knew him, and I didn't, but he was a hunter.
Exactly.
Yeah, he was a hunter. He loved to hunt.
He was a hunter. And his family has directed us now, who are in charge of that endowment, and the money we do by contract are allowed to take. A huge part of that gets spent on future hunters.
Yep, no doubt about it.
Youth, recruitment, education, because the family said that's what our father would have wanted, and we entrust you, the Elk Foundation, are going to do what's right by my father's wishes.
What greater legacy could you have than to have that wish be fulfilled through, again, an endowment that enables us to look our children and grandchildren in the eye and say, this organization is for you and it'll be here 20 years from now. It's awesome. It's just...
It is. When his son came and spoke at Elk Camp 2 years ago, to me, he talked about the sense of responsibility. Not just that he felt, but the sense of responsibility that comes with position or where, sometimes it's just right place, right time. And I left there with this sense of, I don't know if he understands what a remarkable presentation he gave for a younger guy. I left there and said, I've got a serious sense of duty. My responsibility in this organization as one of 24 board members, it just clarified that vision even further. I mean, it's been pretty clear, but it was like, all right, there are so many people maybe not to the degree that Mr. Torstensen was able to help out, but even the guy who, he's an oil worker in Wyoming and he gives us a $5,000 donation. I want to make sure that $5,000 does something really good for elk, the land, and the next hunters who are going to come after me.
Yep.
And so I just, it's so remarkable to think about where you guys have come with this and what you've done, the kind of the example you've set. And you guys are so humble. When people listening, when you get around these two, they're on good behavior right now because they know they're being recorded. But you are never going to spend a lunch hour in greater comedy and just sitting on the edge of your seat as they spin story after story after story. And it just makes you so grateful that that we live in a country where people like you, the two of you and your other two co-founders, could come up with something that became what the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation is.
It's amazing. It is.
Totally a blessing. And I'll tell you, people say, wow, I want to thank you. And I just am happy to be a part of this thing. I mean, just being a part of something that is so dynamic that you can hug people you don't even know because they're Elk Foundation members, and you can celebrate some of the neatest things that you just only dream about when you're out on the landscape and you've just put to bed 20,000 acres or 18 sections of land that are sustainable and there and provide access for more hunting and recreation. It's mind-boggling.
Yeah,
it's
it is
just,
it. And for me, people who listen to me, watch me on TV, know that I'm pretty passionate about conservation, and I take very seriously a lot of things that are given to us as Americans. You read about the right for the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. I don't understand what's so vague about that.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah,
There's nothing
exactly.
big.
And just like our public lands that we have,
Yeah.
there's nothing vague about how valuable these are
Yep.
to the Americans. Most of the work the Elk Foundation does is on public land.
Clearly.
And so America's given the world these great institutions, this Constitution, this Declaration of Independence. And I think that our public lands and our sense of conservation, giving the world the idea that, you can make the world a better place. The land can be healthier, the whole place can be better, and we can still live there. That was something the world didn't really know about until Theodore Roosevelt and some other people said, we can do this. And when you read anything Roosevelt talked about, it was for the generation yet unborn.
That's right.
And it was, who was the greatest hunter, not in terms of trophies, but who was the most committed hunter to ever occupy the White House?
Teddy Roosevelt.
But by far.
And he left us there greatly. If you haven't read that passage that he put out, it says something about those who try and fail and get up again and marred by dust and blood. And yet, when it's all over, he pities the man who never experiences that high achievement. And that's what every member of the Elk Foundation would be proud of because they drive this outfit. So I'm thrilled to be a part of it.
Well, you guys are just one more expression of that, one more generation of that. And I can't thank you guys enough for taking an hour and a half of time. And before we leave, though, everybody gets some closing comments because sometimes those closing comments go to marital advice. They might be, it might be how your wife likes to, cook her pies.
Well, my wife is waiting out there in the corridor for the last hour and a half.
So you're saying I'm gonna
have a little less posterior, whatever that is, on the backside of my belt.
Yeah, he's going to the woodshed. There's no doubt about it.
Well, I always, we have this big website, hunttalk.com, and whenever we do a podcast, I like to go and tell the audience a little bit about the people who they're going to hear on the podcast and the topics. And I always like to leave it with the colorful closing comments that the guests have. So, who wants to go first?
Bob.
Bob, okay, your closing comment.
My closing comment is that I guess I've had tremendous blessings beyond my wildest dreams. Charlie and I are still friends, which is, after 31 years in this outfit, is amazing. We've both been blessed collectively now with 104 years of blissful marriage.
Collectively,
yes,
wow.
Collectively, which our wives are saints, and they deserve a lot of this credit. But no, I'm just so thrilled to have a God that has put this organization into motion and says, hey, I'm leaving it up to you folks to husband my creation and my landscape, and that's what the Elk Foundation's doing.
Great. Charlie, you got closing comments, or is Yvonne out there giving you the
she hasn't peeked in yet, but I'm expecting it any minute. But, no, it truly has been an amazing ride, and it's an amazing story. But there again, it boils down to the people. But I really think the good Lord put us on this earth to use, not abuse, this landscape. And my hope is that when I'm gone, that we have left a little bit of a legacy, that we tried to do the best we could.
Yeah, and you guys have. It's as someone who I remember 3 years ago when former Chairman John Cade, Chairman of the board, called me and said, "Randy, Charlie and Bob think that we should nominate you to be on the board." You guys are gonna laugh. It was like if I was a little kid and Michael Jordan came up and asked me if I wanted to play horse. It's just having watched you guys over the years, and even before I knew you, watching this organization have its challenges and rebound and come back even stronger. For me to be asked to do it is just, it's such a, and besides the honor and the flattering that it comes with it, it just gets back to who I am because I'm a hunter. And what that is I am a hunter, and therefore I am connected to these lands, and I am connected to that next generation that I want them to look back like I look back at you guys and say, you know what, those guys gave it to me better than they got it, and I'm going to give it to my kid or grandkids or those kids better than I got it. And I think that's what hunters at their core.
It is.
It's what's made us different in a society like you referred to earlier, Bob, is kind of scattered and dysfunctional in a lot of ways. Hunters, through hunting, have this grounded, this ability to stay grounded to what's important. And for me, everything the Elk Foundation is doing and stands for, in spite of all of, we all have our warts and bumps and whatever, but when the end of the day is measured, I will take what you guys have done, and 100 years from now, I hope someone turns this podcast back on and says, wow, those guys are the ones who started all this. So,
well, let me tell you, after having 100-some people on the board over the last 31 years, Charlie and I both feel about you that you're just a huge asset to this organization. You've got the right values, and I just wish you the best.
Amen to that.
Well, thanks, guys. And this is a bit of humor. Charlie's the character on the board. Charlie and Bob have the founders' positions on the board, and there's 24 of us on the board. And when you come to the board, someone stands up and says, I'm going to be his or her mentor. Charlie stood up and said, Newberg, I'm going to be your mentor. So now, anytime I do something that the rest of the board looks at or says, oh my goodness, where did he get this from? I just point to Charlie and said, I'm speaking at the direction of my mentor. Anyhow, guys, thanks for all you've done. People listening, if you are not a member of the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, I sure hope you will become one, because it's just an organization that is doing so much for hunters, for our cause, for the landscape. And we're about ready to sign off on Randy Newberg Unfiltered. You can find everything about us and our platforms at randynewberg.com, whether it's the TV show Fresh Tracks, the web forum hunttalk.com. If you want to download our episodes, old and new, or if you want to learn about the Elk Foundation, there's a link right there at randynewberg.com where you can become a member of the Elk Foundation. And Bob just gave me the wait. I got one more thing I want to add.
Yeah, Randy, do something about those white legs, will you?
Well, people, since this is not visual, you can't see it, but I wore shorts to the board meeting this weekend, and I have pale northern Minnesota Scandinavian skin. And anytime the board meeting gets a little tense, we always look for somebody to kind of soften it up and add some humor. My white legs were the source of humor for the last weekend here in Missoula, Montana. But anyhow, folks, Charlie Decker, Bob Munson, wonderful guys, two of the founders of the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation. Thanks for listening.